You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
I'd like to call to order the June 6, 2017 formal meeting of the Iowa City City Council. Roll call.
Botchway.
Here.
Cole.
Here.
Dickens.
Here.
Mims.
Here.
Taylor.
Here. Well,
Thomas.
here.
Here.
Throgmorton.
Here. People in the audience have probably noticed that Pauline Taylor is not physically present, but she is here virtually. Hi, Pauline. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. It's a balmy 107 degrees here.
Well, there you go.
170?
So you're going to go,
107, yes.
You're
Yes,
gonna go-
107.
you're going to go to the swimming pool immediately after the meeting, huh?
All right.
Okay. Item 2, proclamations. We have 2 proclamations for tonight. The first has to do with Men's Health Month, June being Men's Health Month. Is anybody here to accept this proclamation? If not, I think I'll avoid reading it. It's a good thing. It just declares June as being Men's Health Month and urges men to be healthy and urges everybody to help men be healthy. So that's a good thing. Susan, could you pass this down to Kelly? The second one is Pride Month. So let me read that proclamation. Whereas lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered people across the nation celebrate their pride in their culture and community in the month of June, and whereas lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered people in the Iowa City community will celebrate Pride Day on June 17th, and whereas the Iowa City community is strengthened and enhanced through contributions of all its diverse citizens, now therefore I, James A. Throgmorton, Mayor of the City of Iowa City, Iowa, do hereby proclaim June 2017 to be Pride Month. Is there someone who could accept the proclamation, please? Nice to see you. You could make a statement if you wanted to, but you don't have to. Yeah, okay.
We didn't clap. Well, I didn't know. I thought it was a statement.
Okay. Item 3, consider adoption of the consent calendar as presented or amended, and the person who makes the motion should note that we're going to remove item 3D6 concerning Riverfront Crossings Park Phase 1 for separate consideration.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Botchway, second by Dickens. Roll call.
Botchway.
Yes.
Cole.
Yes.
Dickens.
Yes.
Mims.
Yes.
Taylor.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Throgmorton.
Yes, motion carries 7-0. So, item 3D6, Riverfront Crossings Park Phase 1, resolution awarding contract and authorizing the mayor to sign and the city clerk to attest a contract for construction of the Riverfront Crossings Park Phase 1 project.
Move approval.
Yeah.
Second.
Moved by Mims, second by Botchway. Julie Seidel Johnson.
Hi, very excited. I'm always excited to talk about this project, but got the bids in for this project. They came in very well, so we're recommending that we award the contract to PCI for the base amount plus alternates 1 and 2. So let me walk you through the master plan if we could dim the lights a little bit. To remind you what's in this phase. So Phase 1, first of all, includes creating the 5-acre wetland piece, although it does not include the bridge that it shows here. That became a bridge to kind of nowhere without the trail connections to it. Phase 1 includes the realignment or the changing of the creek and the clearing of the creek. So if you are sitting over here and looking out right now, you see all the trees along the creek. That's a lot of scrub trees. Those will be coming out with the project, so you'll be able to see out into the new park from the other side of the creek. Phase 1 was included at first the trail here along Highway 6, including a box culvert crossing of the creek all the way to Gilbert Street. And then another alignment of the trail through the park. We know this is one of the most heavily traveled trails in Iowa City, bicycle trails. With the bids coming in the way they did and accepting the first 2 alternates, we'll be able to add the rest of the trail section that you'll see here along the west side. I'll follow it this way, up and connecting. And then the north entrance with the circle drive and the parking area. I forgot to mention that the bridge at 2nd Street is included in Phase 1. The other alternate that we bid was the third crossing of the creek up here at 1st Street. We decided not to accept that at this time.
Okay, any questions for Julie?
Just excited to see it getting going.
Yeah, and I'm very pleased to see that we're able to include alternates 1 and 2. So we got a good bid, and we're taking advantage of it, right? Yeah, excellent. Anything else?
I just wanted to note the completion is summer of 2018, is that right?
Yeah, most of the work will be done this fall. We're just not sure if the seeding will be able to be done before the winter comes. So the seeding may take place in the spring. The playground will be bid later this summer. I forgot to mention that. And that construction would be either late fall, early spring. Just depends on the weather we get at the end of the season.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Cole.
Yes.
Dickens.
Yes.
Mims.
Yes.
Taylor.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Throgmorton.
Yes?
Botchway.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Item 4, community comment for items not on the agenda. So if anybody would like to address any topic that's not on the formal meeting agenda, please feel free to do so now. I'd like to ask you to limit your comments to not more than 5 minutes and state your name when you come up. So would anybody like to address us? Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening.
Did you bring this? Your badge. Did you bring that?
My name is Lorraine Dorfman, and I was appointed to the Senior Center Commission this year. So I'm here to sort of update you on some of the things that have been going on in the Senior Center lately and that are planned for the near future. One is that we sponsored what's called a SAGE table, round table potluck last month in observance of National SAGE Day. SAGE is, just to remind everybody, a national organization that's an acronym for Services and Advocacy for LGBT Elders. And so the idea is to encourage interaction between that particular group of elders and other people in the community. According to our coordinator, it was pretty successful. We would like a larger turnout next time, but it's a beginning. Another thing we did was participate just this last weekend in the concert in the Iowa Arts Festival downtown. Another thing is because Elder Services in town, Elder Services Agency has had significant staffing reductions. We've taken over the distribution of the food coupons for the farmers market, and the first distribution was on June 2nd, just a little while ago, and 35 people came to get the coupons. Our guess is that there'd be more people in the future, but I think 35 is a significant number. And then some updates about some of the structural things or improvements that are going on at the senior center physically. One of our exercise rooms, room 103, that's used for various fitness activities, is going to be remodeled shortly. I don't have an exact date, but I've been told it's shortly. It's now carpeted. It's going to be, the floor is going to be turned into hardwood flooring. There's going to be painting, scraping of the walls, repainting the cracks and so forth. Some pretty ragged bookshelves. Shelves are going to be eliminated. I don't know if anything is going to go up in their place. And then upstairs, some of the classrooms are getting new window treatments. And finally, we have already done some replacement of having bigger tables in the classrooms to seat more people, because there's really very high demand for some of our classes, and we've really not been able to seat people very comfortably. So that's just sort of an update of some of the things that are going on.
Thank you.
Sounds great, Lorraine. Thank you. I think I saw one of the classes this afternoon. I saw some people learning about how to do perspectival drawing. There were like 5 or 6 people out on the street trying to figure out how to do that. It was fun to see. I think that was the senior center, folks. Anyhow, thank you, Lorraine. Anybody else? Interesting sound. Okay, so seeing no one else who wants to speak, let's turn to item 5, planning and zoning matters. The first item concerns rezoning Prairie Hill. This is item 5A. And it's an ordinance for a rezoning to amend a preliminary plan development overlay OPD plan for 7.8 acres of property located west of Miller Avenue and south of Benton Street. This is first consideration, but before I open the public hearing, I want to ask if anybody's had private conversations with anybody about this rezoning and needs to disclose them publicly. Seeing no one, I'll open the public hearing. Hello, John Yap.
Good evening, John Yap, Development Services. In 2015, the City Council approved a plan development for the Prairie Hill development, which was proposed as a 33-unit co-housing development. It is under construction, as you can see from these photos, and this is the plan that was approved. This is Miller Street, and Benton Street is to the north. Recently, the applicant proposed a small change to add 3 units to the development. 1 additional unit in what is called the common house, which has some units on the second floor, and 2 additional units by changing this duplex to a 4-plex. In addition, that triggers a few more parking spaces on the site as well. Everything else about the development is consistent with what was approved in the past, other than the 3 additional units and the changes in parking. Staff recommends approval. Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval.
Thank you, John. Any questions for John? Hearing no questions, I need to ask whether anybody on the council would like to sort of vote in a way differing from the Planning and Zoning Commission. I see nobody, so I'm going to close the public hearing.
Move first consideration.
Second.
Moved by Botchway, second by Thomas. Discussion? I'm glad we're doing this. It seems to be compatible with what the folks who are doing this development want to do, and it fits well with their proposal. So, roll call.
Dickens?
Yes.
Mims?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Throgmorton.
Yes?
Botchway.
Yes.
Cole.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Item 5B, rezoning Deluxe Bakery. An ordinance conditionally rezoning approximately 3,440 square feet of property located at 812 South Summit Street from low-density single-family residential with historic district overlay, RS50HD, to neighborhood commercial with historic district overlay, CN1 OHD. This is second consideration, but the applicant has requested expedited action. Again, I need to ask if there are any ex parte disclosures that need to be made.
I did stop and talk to Jamie Powers after our first vote, simply to indicate my support for the project, and that was about the extent of the conversation.
Did you have a goodie?
Oh, yes, I bought some stuff while I was there.
Important for ex parte communication.
That's right. Okay, does someone want to make a motion to waive second consideration as the applicant has requested?
I move that the rule requiring that ordinances must be considered and voted on for passage at 2 council meetings prior to the meeting at which it is to be finally passed be suspended, that the second consideration and vote be waived, and that the ordinance be voted on for final passage at this time.
Second.
Moved by Mem, seconded by Dickens. Discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Mims.
Yes.
Taylor.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Throgmorton.
Yes.
Botchway.
Yes.
Cole.
Yes.
Dickens.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Move final consideration at this
Second.
time.
Moved by Mem, seconded by Dickens. Discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Taylor.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Throgmorton.
Yes.
Botchway.
Yes.
Cole.
Yes.
Dickens.
Yes.
Mims.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Apparently, there's been correspondence. Could I have a motion to accept correspondence,
So
please?
moved.
Second.
Moved by Botchway, seconded by Dickens. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Item 5C, rezoning 202 North Lynn Street. An ordinance conditionally rezoning approximately 4,550 square feet of property from Central Business Service, CB2 zone, to Central Business Support, CB5 zone, located at 202 North Lynn Street. This is the Corridor State Bank property. This is pass and adopt. Again, does anybody need to make any ex parte disclosures?
Yeah, I attended a porch gathering Memorial Day weekend with some Northsiders by name. They would be Beth and John Rapson, Diana Harris, John Brandon, Susan Shalot, Sarah Clark, Amy Kretkowski, Dan Kenny, Pooja Burla, Charles Stanier, and Heather Widmeyer. We discussed the project.
Let me just ask one question. Was there anything of substance that you learned at that meeting that is not already of record?
No.
Anyone else? I also was at that Brown Street block party. I talked with, 4 or 5, 6 people at the most. I heard very brief conversations where they started discussing the topic, and I said, I have to disclose this publicly if you go further into it, and I'd rather not have to do that. So they stopped, and I walked away. Also, let's see now, something else. I went to Ross Nusser's Good Neighbor event at the library on May the 25th and attended, the first half, Ross, and so I heard what people were saying during that Good Neighbor meeting. Okay. So, we have a motion on the floor, do we not? So,
No. Move adoption.
Second.
So moved by Mims, seconded by Botchway. Would anybody like to address this topic? I know we've held our public hearing, but I think it's really important to be able to hear from people. So if anybody wants to address the topic, please do so, and keep your comments to not more than 5 minutes, please. And state your name when you first come up.
My name is Mark Priest. I'm just excited about what our city's doing for the north side. And the merchants and the neighbors are really coming together. And this is a corner that everybody is ready to see something happen. So thank you for your interest.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, Nancy.
Hi there. Nancy Bird, the Iowa City Downtown District. I'll write my name down here for a second. Thank you for taking additional comment. I just wanted to express the support on behalf of the Iowa City Downtown District. I think that's been a given moving forward, but Ross has done everything possible to reach out and really get a good understanding of what kind of support there is for redevelopment of that site. As you know, it's important to add supply downtown. There's a lot of interest in additional commercial and residential opportunities, and this is essentially an underutilized infill site. So I think it's the right use, the right time. The north side neighborhood, the merchants, and a number of the other neighborhoods, as Mark mentioned, have been coming to meetings to talk about what's appropriate in this area, and there's a ton of support. So we really appreciate your listening and support for the project as well. I think it's the right scale, and I think as far as form-based code, and I know that's under review right now, form-based code on the north side seems very appropriate, and if this is the type of scale that is chosen down the road, we heard at a meeting this morning when we were talking about other things that some of the businesses were asking, it seems to make a lot of sense to rezone the entire neighborhood, the north side element, so that it's not one by one that we keep having to come to council. So the scale seems to really work, and Ross has done a lot of hard work, and we really want to support him. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Nancy.
I'm Ross Nusser of Urban Acres Real Estate. Just wanted to give a quick update to the council. We had a good neighbor meeting since we last met. I've spoken to various neighbors, and I got a very interesting history lesson from Mary Ellen Hudacek, and that was pretty eye-opening that I did not know the full history of this neighborhood as much as I thought that I did. I had gone to the State Historical Society to do some research on this neighborhood, and it was very, very interesting. Furthermore, we had a good neighbor meeting on May 25th. That meeting was very productive, and we were able to gauge feedback. That will not be the last good neighbor meeting. We got a decent amount of feedback there, but I would still like and encourage more residents as we go forward to give more feedback, especially as it relates to the aesthetic of the building. One of the things that we incorporated in one of the new renderings is a corner cut that Ofer came up last meeting and talked about. Also, solar on the roof is now incorporated into that, as well as the green space is clearly designated. I met with the Northside SMID district this morning and had a very nice conversation. I would like this not to be the end of this project. It will very likely be the case that I will be coming back to you, especially as it pertains to the rooftop terrace. So with that, I just wanted to give council an update. I'd also like to say thank you very much for the past support from everyone, as well as city staff has been exceptional. So if there are any questions, I will gladly take them. Otherwise, we're flying along.
How many people attended the Good Neighbor meeting?
I think that it was about 20.
Good turnout.
Anybody want to ask Ross any questions?
From the last meeting, Ross, if you wouldn't mind elaborating on the senior housing
Yeah,
component piece of
absolutely.
that.
So one of the things that I've been a strong advocate for during this entire process is senior housing. And what I have stated this entire time is that 2 floors should be dedicated to senior housing. That is not able to happen via a bizarre HUD rule. And the HUD rule states that 80% of the building has to be senior housing if it's 55 plus. Or there's another one where it's a little bit greater age and it has to be 100% of the building. The way in which I intend to address that, because I cannot put any sort of covenant there, first of all.
Pauline, we're getting an awful lot of noise from your end.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Thank you.
Some way I can mute that?
That seems to be a lot better, Pauline, thanks.
Okay.
So, since I cannot legally discriminate for half of this building being senior housing. The way in which I intend to address that is that I will do everything to make these units accessible for seniors, including wider doors, wider hallways. The elevator will be a huge component there, electrical switches, and making every bathroom handicap accessible. It's a very, I'm very committed to this idea. I cannot come right out and say these will be age-restricted housing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
All right. You're not speaking again, right, Mark?
No, I forgot to do that.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, seeing no one else, council discussion?
I just wanted to mention a few things here, and I continue to support the project, but I will say that I still have lingering concerns about the size of the building. And with that concern, spent some time over the last several weeks. We had a 3-week break looking at how CB10 has been addressed in other parts of Iowa City. There are other CB5 zones which occur in the vicinity of the downtown. I've looked at that. I've also looked at the pertinent rezonings in the north side itself, and I'll just try to briefly go through those. Jim had mentioned at our last meeting references in the central district plan, which we're really quite explicit about the size of any new projects that the community felt would be appropriate. And basically what it says was encourage 2 to 3 story buildings that would be consistent with the existing Main Street commercial character of the area. So that, as I recall, Jim, was your focus. So I'd like to add to that what I found over the last several weeks. First was a rezoning on Lynn Street itself with the Northside Bistro, which is in 2014. It was the first CB5 zoning north of Market Street. Lynn Street is north of Market is CB2. The Northside Bistro wanted a change in the parking requirement to allow for restaurant use. And so what ended up happening there was the concerns about future redevelopment of the property, if the historic property were ever destroyed, led to City Council approving a conditional zoning agreement requiring that any redevelopment shall comply with the CB2 building standards. This was in our staff report of April 6th. So what this suggests to me is that the recommendations of the Central District Plan were conformed with this decision that any new development north of Market Street, in this instance, was consistent with the goals of the Central District Plan. I also looked at the Northside Neighborhood Form-Based Code video on City Channel 4. There was a second meeting in May last month at Horace Mann Elementary. And part of that analysis was looking at our existing codes within the study area, which include a small amount of CB5. And so Opticos went through and indicated what some of the strengths and weaknesses were of the various codes and thus looked at the CB5 zone. One of the weaknesses that they stated was that the CB5 could yield results that are not aligned with the existing context, and that Opticos would like to help the city implement a simpler way to achieve the neighborhood Main Street scale called for in the Central District Plan. So what they referred to there was taking our existing zoning categories, and the term that form-based coders often use is calibrate. So you have a zone here, in this case of a CB5. How do you get it to better align with the existing conditions? Now, what Opticos is recommending, we don't know. I mean, this is an ongoing study. They were just looking at issues that they felt would need to be addressed as they move forward. But there was this concern that CB5 zoning could yield results that wouldn't align with the existing context. The last thing I would mention was the CB5 zoning on Iowa Avenue between Gilbert and Van Buren Street. In this instance, the CB5 zoning was amended to incorporate form-based code standards from the South Gilbert District, which was intended to achieve a better fit in that transition zone between the downtown core and the east side neighborhoods. So here we had a CB5 zone. Staff felt in order to make that fit again, how do we calibrate the CB5 zone to create a better fit in that zone, in that area? And so what ended up happening, and you can see it on the Whistler development, is that the standards required a 10-foot wide building step back above the 4th floor. So it goes up 4 floors, steps back 10 feet, and then the 5th floor is set back. What I also began to, what that suggested to me is, well, if our building on the corner of Lynn and Market is 5 stories and there's no step back, what sub-district would apply? Where could you build such a building in the Riverfront Crossings area? And the only sub-district would be the South Downtown District. So that too suggests to me this question and concern about is CB5 without any conditions appropriate on this corner? If the only place you can do that in Riverfront Crossings is the South Downtown District, which is essentially an extension of the downtown. So where this leaves me is that, like Jim, I do feel, and we're dealing with a conceptual plan, which is another complicating aspect of this, which is not tied to our rezoning, would be to condition the CB5 zoning, and I would suggest one of 2 ways. Jim mentioned 4 stories, 4-story height limit, and there what I would say is the basis of that would be the corner emphasis treatment adds a 1-story over the 2 to 3 stories that are recommended in the Central District Plan. A second option would be to take the approach taken along Iowa Avenue, and that would be to allow 5 stories with the condition that the 5th floor would be stepped back 10 feet. There's been mention in this analysis that, in the discussion of this by staff, that the precedent for 5 stories is the 4-story building to the south, the high ground building, which, if you include the roof line, is very close to the overall height of the 5-story proposal. That if we really are using that as a reference in order to set the building height for this, for the corner to the north, the appropriate way to do that would be to step back the 5th floor. That would establish that same angle of setback that the roof line on the high ground building has. Otherwise, you're building a 5-story building from the back of sidewalk straight up. So those to me seem to be the 2 options, but as it stands with CB5 without any conditions applied to it, does seem to me to be inconsistent not only with the Central District Plan, but these various other conditions and studies that have made in various locations that relate to CB5 zoning. And so, again, I totally support the project. I view this as kind of a calibration, a minor modification to the building form in order to get it better into alignment with the conditions at that location.
Can I ask you a clarifying question or two? I tracked most of what you said, but I didn't track the first recommendation you made with regard to a possible condition for the rezoning. Could you restate it and be using different words?
Well, there were 2 options as I see it. One was the option you suggested, 4-story height limit. The second option would be allowing a 5th floor but stepping back the 5th floor 10 feet, similar to what was done with the building on Iowa Avenue, which is conforming to the South Gilbert subdistrict within Riverfront Crossings. And that would better capture, if the intent is to capture the character of how High Ground works, that building, you really need to step back that 5th floor to do it. Because otherwise your 5th floor is coming right up to the property line.
Well, the idea of attaching conditions raises issues, but which we might need to get into. Let's hear from other people, though, and find out what people are thinking.
I'm going to continue to support the project. I think it works there. I think you've raised some interesting points, John, that might be relevant for future discussion on the CB5. But given where we're at right now, and I think with the height of the High Ground building, I don't see, and particularly that corner cut now that they're talking about doing, I don't see this as being incompatible with that area. And so I'm going to support the project. I think additional housing, I like the idea that certainly the effort and dedication's there for the senior housing, although obviously Ross has to be a little bit more careful about how he does it in terms of HUD rules. But I think, again, it continues to revitalize a very much underutilized piece of property on the north side.
So what is the HUD rule? What is the HUD rule in terms of?
Sorry.
In terms of how it pertains to senior housing, because that was actually a huge part of my support of this project. So it's illegal as it was currently proposed to have those 2 floors set aside or deed restricted to more than 80%, or how does that rule work?
The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of familial status.
Yeah.
Like you can't prohibit
Yes.
children.
Yes.
And, but there's a housing for older persons piece exception to that act,
Okay.
which allows you to do deed restricted housing for 55 and older.
Okay.
But the HUD regulations talk about you can't, because the idea is to have a single community or facility.
Yeah.
You can't take a single building and carve it up, you know,
Okay.
i.e. one floor for senior and, but they have this 80-20 rule that they use. 80% of it has to be at any one time occupied by one person at least 55.
So if there were more than 80% seniors, you could do it if it was.
I haven't gotten into the details of
Okay.
that legal analysis, but I think it can be tricky because if you dedicate 20% of your units to people who aren't 55 and older, then you always have to have 80%. If someone who is the 55-year and older resident dies and their heirs or surviving spouse does not meet that criteria, then you have fallen below the 80% threshold. So I think, as I understand it, it can be tricky to maintain that 80-20%.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would agree. I mean, the senior housing component was a huge piece of mine as well, just because I've heard from a lot of folks, when I say a lot of folks, a couple of folks, one that were mentioned previously, that have been interested in kind of that downsizing and moving towards something closer to downtown. And so I still think there's a need. I will say I'll support this project as well. I think that, John, you bring up some good points about the, I'm not necessarily inclined with the CB4 height limit, but I did like the kind of idea around kind of the 10-foot step back as it pertains to that. For me, it's a process piece. And when I say it, again, so I can clarify what I mean by a process piece is that, when we kind of go down this road, it's tough enough getting people to, know what the process is. And we make changes to the process, I think, right in the middle of it. I just have a fundamental kind of disagreement with that from, more of a systemic inequality standpoint than maybe just this, but kind of, expanding it from not only that, but this. I just think it's just, right now, I would be willing to consider if we were kind of talking about this previous to it, but since we're at now the third consideration or pass and adopt, I'm ready to move forward in this project. I think that my feeling, though, is if we're going to, I mean, since you brought up this kind of example and discussion and some inconsistencies, I think that right after this discussion or sometime in the kind of after meeting segment, after we get done with this, we just need to say that this is something that we'd like to do from a council standpoint moving forward so we can get something on the books and do something like that. Because I do think, I mean, you bring up and you did some research around it that it is an issue that, I think needs to be addressed. I just don't see doing it right now as being the most feasible thing, not only from the community standpoint, from a process standpoint, but also for the respective, developer kind of trying to do it and work within the ramifications or work within the
Current rules.
And restrictions that we have. So I'm supportive. I'm excited. I mean, after I just said all that kind of concerning negative stuff, I am excited. I mean, not to say anything about Corridor National Bank, state bank property. It's amazing bank property. I don't bank there, but it's just, to me, it's an eyesore that needed something else. I think that this will do it, and I hope that it activates. I mean, I'll use some your language. It activates the street from a walkability standpoint with the residents that are there. And I know that many of you, including myself, frequent that the High Ground location or other locations in that area. And I think that it'll just do more to kind of bring the north side into a different type of discussion with the surrounding area, but also people that want to go there as well. So I'm excited.
Yep. I'm going to support it. I would echo what Susan said and most of what Kingsley said.
Everything that I said.
Well, anyway, I think it's a great project. I just think Ross has a little bit of project of trying to market it to the seniors. I know you can market it to it. You don't have to exclusively sell it that way, but that's a big component in there. But everything else about the project I like. The height doesn't bother me because of the height across the street. It is a corner piece of property, but I do think, like John says, in the future that we look into the setbacks and other items in that area.
I got to say, I came into this meeting supportive of the project, and it's a very close call, but the senior project was a huge part of it. And I hear what you're saying, Kingsley, in terms of I'm always extraordinarily reluctant at the third stage. Developers base their development projects on expectations, predictability, and consistency. So I completely understand that. But, we've talked a lot in the past about the 11th hour, and so we're really on the cusp here of learning and passing this, and we learned 10 minutes ago that the central component, I almost viewed it almost as like a density bonus, a bonus type concept, where we were going to get a commitment to senior housing in this area, and now we have no legally enforceable mechanism to do it other than marketing. I don't know that that's good enough for me at this point. This was a central part of this. This was something that we learned 10 minutes ago. I could reconsider that, but at this point, I'm having a lot of concerns. I can't say I would never consider it again, but I'm having a lot of concerns about where we're at this point. I think especially in light of the fact we have yet another project that does not comply with the comprehensive plan, in my view, especially related to the specific recommendations as to height. You had mentioned, John, for example, the Bistro location where they had a CB2 concept and they were able to up-dome to CB5 to avoid the parking requirement. That could be something that I could really look at if the parking requirement is what's going to prevent this from being redone. But the senior housing piece of it, the fact that we learn about it now in the third reading, this is the sort of information that we need to learn about at the first meeting. So I'm inclined not to support it at this point.
I'd clarify one item. There is, with the first reading, there was no condition on the senior housing. That was something that the applicant said that he was hoping to explore, but at least the staff recommendation, what went through P&Z and was presented to you on the first reading, did not require senior housing. I think that the part of the reason, in addition to meeting the demand that's out there, that the applicant wanted to pursue the senior housing is because there were some parking benefits to do so. So if he could meet a segment of the market and also benefit from some of the relaxed parking restrictions for those types of units, it was kind of a win-win for him. The height of the building, and this is part of the discussion that we had at the staff level when we were determining how best to make our recommendation to planning and zoning and ultimately to you. just because it's CB5 doesn't mean it can achieve its maximum height, and that's going to go, any of the CB zones that we have. You have to look at the site constraints. You have to look at the applicant's ability to park the units that they're looking at. You have to consider all the floor area ratio bonuses that they can get and what they're eligible to and whatnot. So you've got to be a little bit careful comparing this particular property to, say, the Northside Bistro property, because the square footage of the lot, the different unique considerations of those different lots could yield two very different products on that site. What you can achieve on the Northside Bistro, should that building ever be raised and rebuilt, could be very different from what could be achieved on this particular property. Given the constraints that that are contained on this Central State Bank property, I think it's going to be very challenging, and the applicant knows this, to get 5 stories, particularly if there's not an ability to deed restrict the senior housing. Even if he's able to market the units to seniors, he's not going to get that same parking benefit, and he's already working really hard to try to meet the parking requirements of the residential units. So don't just think that he can go as high as he wants, because particularly with this property, you can't park more than 6 or 7. And if he comes back and if this were to pass at the 3rd reading today and he can't achieve what he wants to because of the parking, he may come back to you and say, okay, here's the new concept and here's what I'm willing to do, but I can't finagle the parking. Is this something that you want to look at, council? And I think that's could potentially be a likely scenario based on whatever revised concept comes up. But getting back to my first point, staff felt CB5 was appropriate without any conditions because a lot of the site constraints, and we did not recommend any conditions on the senior housing component.
Pauline, did you want to express a view?
Yes, actually, I do. And to be perfectly honest, my votes previously, I was originally drawn to the innovative concepts of the whole plan, in particular for the senior housing aspect of it, and just to sort of change the scenery on that corner. But I lost sight of the actual request, which was the rezoning and the impact that change might have on that neighborhood. And I've driven by there a couple of times since just to kind of get a feel of it. And so I realized why 3 readings are necessary on these kinds of things, because I'm inclined at this point to change my vote and go in the negative, because obviously P&Z they weren't unanimous on their approval. They had some concerns. And another concern of mine is like the transition from downtown to the north side neighborhood. I think, the taller buildings are downtown, and there should be more of a transition from there through into the actual neighborhoods. And I can't see that, although if I saw the final plan in front of me that said it would be 4 stories or 4 stories with the setback, perhaps I would change my opinion. But as I think was brought up the last couple of times, we don't really have a plan design, a final plan design. So I'm inclined this time to not support this.
Okay, thanks. So I want to ask our city attorney a question. It could be that there are sufficient votes to deny this proposed rezoning if we vote tonight. I'm wondering if it's possible to defer action on this to give Ross, the applicant, time to consider the comments that have been made during this discussion, and I suppose come back to us with a more definitive statement about what he intends to do. An alternative would be to, if in fact there are 4 votes to deny it, an alternative is to I guess ask for a resubmittal. I know you gave me an email about this, Eleanor, but it's we'd have to attach a condition to the rezoning, and
I can explain that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm stumbling over it. Thank you.
Okay. So in order to attach a condition to the rezoning, and like what you're talking about, a step back or a limit on height, that has to be agreed to, and a conditional zoning agreement has to be signed prior to the close of the public hearing. So if the notion is that you would be looking for the ability to attach a condition, I mean, even if you see a concept plan at this point that is more detailed and more planned out, it won't be binding unless it's part of a conditional zoning agreement. So if that's the way you're headed, I think you'd have to offer a consult to P&Z, and then you'd have to reset the public hearing and start over.
Yeah, because we already closed the public hearing, I don't know, 2 meetings ago. Right. Yeah, so I'm just wondering if there are two possible directions we could conceivably go. One is to defer this vote to our next meeting, which would give Ross, the developer, an opportunity to be more explicit to us about what he wants to do, given the discussion that he's heard. I understand that would not be legally binding, but I have complete trust in Ross that he will do what he says he intends to do. So I'm wondering, that's one route. I think we could go, but I don't know, so I'm asking you. And the other is to vote, and if it turns out to be 3-4 in favor of the proposed rezoning, then say we would be eager to receive basically a revised proposal that involves conditions.
I think you're making an assumption, perhaps, that the land is going to be available to this developer.
I don't know.
And we don't know that.
True enough. I don't know that.
My guess is there's a contingency in a purchase agreement.
Right, which is why I'm asking these questions, in part.
I guess my additional comment I would make, Jim, is in doing a deferral and having Ross bring back more information, and that you trust that he would do what he says he's going to do, because it won't be legally binding. I sit here tonight, and one, I've known Ross and his family for a long, long time, and I trust that what he says on the senior housing, he is going to do. Even though he can't do it deed restricted the way he had originally hoped to do it, because the HUD rules don't allow that, so it's discrimination. I think he has, with every action and comment and effort he has made and shown us, that he is dedicated to making this available to and attractive to and marketing it to seniors. Okay, so for those of you sitting here who said, the senior housing was a big component of this for you, it's never been legally binding since we started this process. And to me, he's committed to it. I think he will do it to the best of his ability. I think we'll get a really good product. I think, we've had some discussion about maybe from what Jeff has said, and as I think about it, maybe what we really need is some education as council members about CB5 and how some of the details work with that in terms of the floor area ratio and some of those things, so we understand better how that gets implemented. I trust that Ross is going to do what he said he's going to do. I don't see how a deferral is going to make any difference, because it's not legally binding. We never had anything. We never had a CZA.
Well,
So-
here's why I think the deferral would be really helpful. This is information that we got, and by the way, I've been extraordinarily impressed with how Ross has gone through this entire process. So I don't want this in any way, shape, or form be construed as me not trusting Ross or the developer or anything else. But for us to get this information and to be able to evaluate it for 2 more weeks, I think that would be helpful. Now, if it's the desire to go forward tonight, it's true that was not going to be a condition, the senior housing component, but that was represented to us that it was going to be a deed restricted portion of that. And it's precisely because we trust that was going to happen. I think it's important to get a little more time to be able to process this. But that was a linchpin for me of this particular project. And now we're learning that may not be the case. And I think then it would come down to a market value assessment between in the open market as opposed with a deed restriction. My presumption is it would be more valuable without the deed restriction than with it. Is that a fair assumption, or am I incorrect on that?
As counsel, do you mind if I come up?
I would love to, yeah, in terms of the deferral.
And Ross, when you come up, you might please come on up. You might clarify, especially for Rockne, given what he said.
No, absolutely.
No,
So,
well, let me finish.
Oh, sorry.
Clarify about the senior housing component of it. Are you saying that there will be no senior housing component? Are you saying that 80% or more will be senior housing? What are you saying?
Yep, and that's an absolutely fair question. What I'm saying is that I have been dedicated to the senior housing component, just as you have all been. And it turns out after last meeting, it was pretty well immediately after, that I found out that there's this small subsection of this rule that states this 80% guideline. My attorney did not catch it. And actually, both of my attorneys did not catch it. And the reason why I came up was in casual conversation with a colleague of mine. It would have been my option, and I would never do this, but I could have just not said anything. But I'm not like that. And every step of this project, I have made it clear that I want community involvement. I want support, and I want to be a good partner within this community. The options for me are to appeal to HUD, to get a special exception to do the senior housing that I want. That has to be signed off by Ben Carson. There's no underling there who signs it off. It's Ben Carson. So it's an inevitable delay on just about everything with that. I want to still gear this project toward that, but I don't want to be subject to a fair housing lawsuit. And so my commitment has not changed. And my commitment to this neighborhood, to the citizens of Iowa City and everyone else has not changed. It is unwavering. And I believe that as I've gone through this process, and maybe not, but I've been trying to get good community feedback, and I've been incorporating that into the design. As it relates to the height, last meeting I stated that it would be very difficult for me to get the 5 stories. Nothing has changed there without the senior housing. Nothing has changed there. This project, right now, this is about the rezoning of this land. And like I said earlier tonight, I will likely be back here in front of you. You are not guaranteed that, should this go forward tonight. But I believe that I have made every good effort and every step to show this council as well as the community that I am committed to this community as well as this project, and I do not want to do anything that would be burdensome to this neighborhood. So as it relates to senior housing, it was a bizarre subset of a rule that was missed by many and that I found out and immediately called.
And I would say, too, I'm glad that you let us know. I mean, we appreciate that as far as, I guess that's why I would like to do the deferral. I need more time to be able to process this. That was a big component for me. It may be that with 2 more weeks of assessment that I would change my vote, but at this point, I'm not inclined to support it.
I don't know if that's possible for you, Ross.
It really is not for me.
I thought so. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm inclined to move forward. I was gonna.
Yeah. Are you going to ask him questions? I was going to ask him.
I do have one question.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you.
Ross,
No,
I
wait,
think,
they've got
hold on.
Okay. Yes.
Just what kind of added cost are we talking every time we move this? I mean, if we have to move it, you said it's not going to happen, but I know with trying to redesign this, I know it's a conceptual plan, but to redesign this, what kind of cost are we talking about to work on a setback? I know you've worked with your architects for quite a while to get this to this point, and we've got it to the 3rd reading, and suddenly we hear people want to change it.
Yeah, so as it relates to setback or any architectural feature, to me, and it's only to me, but that's kind of the purpose of my design review as well as the good neighbor meetings that I'm having, is I want to get the neighborhood to come out and speak. And at the last good neighbor meeting, I did not hear comments from the audience about that, and no one has reached out to me directly. It may be something where it's intimidation or whatever, that they don't want to immediately address me. But I am very open to anyone in this community, and I want to hear concerns. And that's just not a concern that I've heard. Every concern that I've heard, be it solar, be it the corner cut, and I do have a visual of the corner cut. I've tried to incorporate that in. I cannot please everyone with this building, but I can try and please as many people as possible. And this is such a fundamental cornerstone, and it's a pillar of the Northside Marketplace, which is the neighborhood that I love most. And this project cannot be done poorly. And I take that on my shoulders. But I just haven't heard some of these arguments before. I am 100% open to looking at these arguments. However, I would prefer that happen aside from this process. I cannot move forward whatsoever should the zoning not be changed. The current CB2 zoning, and I'm just working within the framework that's been provided to me, but the current CB2 zoning is very, very restrictive to restaurant as well as retail parking. It's also more restrictive to the parking that needs to be provided for the residents above. To me, this zoning change is just the beginning of a very long and very thoughtful project.
Could I ask you one question,
Yes,
please?
absolutely.
If I heard you correctly, you said, without the senior housing, we can't get to 5 stories.
I think that it would be very difficult. I've learned my lesson with the bizarre rule of the senior housing, but I do not think that it would be impossible, but it would be very difficult to get to the 5 stories.
If your limit was 4 stories, could you still have 2 or 3 stories of senior housing?
My limit was 4 stories. I don't know the answer to that. One of the rules that needs to be looked into, that I have my attorneys looking into, is what is the project? Does that include the commercial? Is it just the residential? And that impacts the way that the building is kind of shaped, as well as how that 80% is calculated. And to me, and to my attorneys, that's been somewhat ambiguous. This was just as much of a curveball to me as it is to all of you. And when I found that out, this whole project had been predicated by myself on trying to do it. I do believe it's a great thing for this neighborhood, and it's something that doesn't exist. And one of the things that I looked at the second that I heard that is I looked at these other cities. I thought that Chicago, New York, any of the larger cities that have very large buildings, how do they do this? And the short answer is, I don't know. Either it's illegal and they just decide to go for it and take their chances because there aren't that many people who maybe would call that particular rule out. I don't operate that way, and I won't operate that way. Or is it and one of the things that I was talking with the Northside neighborhood, the business owners, about this morning as it related to senior housing is, if there is an interest from a group of seniors who want to purchase as their group these floors, there is nothing that states, as I believe, and again, I am not an attorney, but as I believe, there's nothing that would prohibit them from leasing to their clientele. So there could be options forward here, but it's a bizarre small rule that popped up, and I felt prudent to address it.
Okay, thank you, Ross.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I'm sticking with what I said before. I will say, as I think others have said, that the senior piece was important to me. I think I mentioned that right before even this Ross questioning. But there are other components, and I did focus on the eyesore that is currently there. No offense to the current bank, but I think that that's something that needs to be addressed. And one of the notes I have here is that we're talking about a developer that wants to address it and wants to address it in an honest way. I mean, that was going to be my point. That's why I wanted to get my point out before Ross even got up, because I was going to say, he didn't have to say anything. And my question to you, Jim, was going to be, what additional information could he come back with in 2 weeks in relation to senior housing? I mean, he can come up and make a statement, I'm committed to senior housing, but he could then not do that. We don't have anything legally binding saying that, you're forced to do it. He really put himself in a bind. But I think that it's important for us, and I don't want to necessarily say, well, it's important for us to support good developers, support people that want to be honest about this, and also support people that are actively talking to the community about changes that they would make. And so I think that, again, kind of going back from a process standpoint, if the folks that you talk to or even yourself are interested in maybe changing that 10-foot setback or whatever, it sounds like he's willing to listen. I don't know too many developers, and I'm not in the developer crew, but I don't know too many developers that would be willing to do that or make changes. And again, I think I did my ex parte, the first reading about my conversation with Ross, but a lot of the stuff that he's talked about now wasn't in that first conversation, and so I'm assuming that those are from the communications from the community. And I would support that type of development and listening to concerns. I mean, I think that, again, I totally agree with you, Rockne. It's a curveball. I've been wanting to do senior housing since it was proposed, I think, in another project earlier when I first started my council term. Could it still be done? It sounds like yes. Does it sound like he's going to continue to try to do it? Yes. Do I think that the community in general can kind of push him on it? Yes. From my standpoint, I still think it's a good development simply for the fact that it really changes that area. And it's not a gross kind of overdevelopment. We're not talking about 10 stories. We're not talking about 8 stories or 7 stories. There is kind of a book in there when you look at that high ground property right there that really, is somewhat congruent with what we're talking about from this building standpoint. So, I'm obviously going to notice a change from a vacant parking lot, but I don't necessarily think the change will change the nature of that community simply because we have a building that's comparable size with the other building right next to it. So I'm supportive. And again, I really hear the concerns from that standpoint. But again, from my standpoint as well, tell me a developer that's listening to the community and willing to change from the first reading to the third reading what they're going to do. I'd be willing to hear, that list. But I think that, I'd be willing to support a developer that's willing to do that and be honest about it.
The other thing, I agree with everything you said, Kingsley, and to add to that, while we got the curveball thrown at us tonight, like you said, that he could have not told us about, he has admitted from the beginning, and Jeff has concurred with this, that there was going to be significant difficulty in getting to the 5 stories. I think a lot of people are sitting here assuming it's going to be 5 stories, and that's not a valid assumption.
Yeah,
and along with that, it's a possibility. It's a possibility, but we don't know for sure if that's going to happen. And so, yes, you have to be able to accept that it will be 5 stories if it does end up to be 5 stories. I get that. Let me just finish, if you would, please. What I'm really concerned about, and kind of echoing and following with what Kingsley said, I think we have the potential here for a really, really high-quality development that fits well within the neighborhood, okay? And it sounds to me like with a deferral, this is gone. We have no idea what's coming back, if or when something is coming back. You're talking about adding housing, you're talking about increasing the tax base, you're talking about adding retail, commercial space, whatever, on the ground floor. To use Kingsley's words, I don't know if it's a blighted site, but it's certainly not the most attractive site in the area. Somebody who's committed to doing the senior housing the best way he can, even though it can't be officially that way because of the HUD rules. To me, the risk that we are taking by approving this is absolutely minimal compared to what the risk we have by defeating it, and in terms of what then ultimately does or does not happen with that property and the time frame in which it takes it to happen. So I think we're really missing a great opportunity if we don't pass this. I realize there's a risk. There's some uncertainties there. But given the developer, his longtime connections in this community, his commitment to doing well by this community, I think it's a risk well worth taking by this council.
Well, I should say some things here because I've been pretty silent and listening a lot because I feel torn about what I want to do. Most of you know that I voted last time against this particular proposal, and I explained my vote, and I'm going to repeat some of that right now. My sense is that that rezoning to CB5 is not inconsistent with the central district portion of the comp plan, but going to 5 stories, which is what I understood would probably happen, is inconsistent with the central district portion of the comp plan, as John articulated. It would significantly exceed the 2 to 3 story limits strongly recommended or suggested in that portion of the comp plan. But also, it would, I believe, having a 5-story building there, if in fact that's what happens, would significantly increase market pressure on all the nearby older buildings and privately owned parking lots, but especially I worry about the older buildings. Increase the market value of them, increase the potential that the market would maybe quickly, I don't want to frighten anybody, but maybe fairly quickly transform key parts of that of the North Side marketplace. So that concerns me a lot, and I know that concern was expressed by, I guess 4 emails we got from various North Side neighbors earlier today. I want to see the property redeveloped. I admire what Ross has done, especially with regard to his outreach. I'm completely convinced he's trying to do what's right, but there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of it, and I really don't like looking at a proposed zoning change with this kind of ambiguity. So last time I voted no. I'm inclined to vote no again tonight, and I really don't want to. So that's why I was asking about whether there'd be some merit in deferring or having a revised version come back to us as a conditional, with agreed upon conditional rezoning elements. But I understand the positive things all of you are saying too. I'm really torn about this.
I would say if there's no deferral, then my inclination is to vote no at this point.
So the question is, John, what's your vote? Because I'm counting to 4.
Before I say what I plan to do, it took me, unfortunately, because of the ambiguity that Jim was just discussing, it took me some time to sort of get through it and say, what are we approving, and what is there out there that comes to bear on that decision, which I tried to outline tonight, which did confirm to me my concerns about the direction the project could go. Again, we don't know. I mean, there's a likelihood that the conditions I feel should be applied to the project will end up being applied to the project, but I don't believe that's a good way for the council to approve a rezoning. I think, the whole direction we're taking as a city now is to get away from floor area ratios, get away from how parking requirements will dictate the size of the building, and determine straight away what is the size of the building that's appropriate in this location. So that's where I felt everything we've been doing over the last couple of years points in that direction, and for some reason we didn't take that process here. I mean, on the Near East Side, there was a real effort by staff to think about how are we going to adjust this CB5 so it works. And for some reason that wasn't done on this one, partly because I think there was this assumption that, well, we may not get 5 anyway, so we don't need to be too concerned with it. But we don't know that, and I feel we don't know it, and as a matter of policy, I think we do need to put what's most important and what was in the Central District Plan forward, and that is, what should the height of the building be? And I personally don't think, particularly the step back, is a significant change to the design. We're talking about a change to the 5th floor. We're not eliminating it, we're stepping it back.
to clarify the Near East Side, that was an initiative that we took because we did not feel it was appropriate to have commercial on the ground floor, which was required in CB5. So when we looked at the mental health property and we looked at the United Action for Youth property, and I think there was even a discussion in these chambers about that and whether commercial requirement on the first floor was really wise for those locations. We all said, no, it's not. And so in addition to addressing that, we took the opportunity with the book being open, so to speak, to put some of those form-based code components in there. But that certainly was not driving that issue. It was the commercial requirement driving that issue.
You're right. It wasn't driving it, but in the end, it did address the form, which I think is absolutely critical when we're rezoning now. That when we rezone, we define the building, and not in detail, but in terms of its shape, its bulk, its height.
So, Mayor Throckmorton, I need 3 minutes. So my question is from are we talking, kind of going back to my process point in the beginning, is this something that you're willing to move forward on today and then talk about that from a process point?
I do think, and again, it took my research into this to become convinced that I am not willing to risk this building being a 5-story building without any modification to it.
Okay, so Eleanor, goes back to the question that Jim proposed earlier, and so if we were able to do that, what could we do from a conditional rezoning standpoint? Because I think there was 2 things: a CB4 height limit, and then also the second one would be the 5 with the 10-foot step back.
You gotta start the process over.
Well, it would take time because you have to set another public hearing, and then you have to have a conditional zoning agreement with that condition in place before the close of the public hearing. As I understand it, Mr. Nusser is not the owner of this property. He has a purchase agreement to purchase this property, and I suspect the contingency is coming shortly. So I think one of the things you have to understand, and I don't know the details about that, but is you may be willing to have that time, but he may not, or the seller may not. I don't know. And the property could be back on the market. It could be a different owner. Any number of things could happen. So it could get somebody who wanted to develop it who was fine with the CB2 conditions. So I just
So I
want
have
to
a
make
question
sure you
for
get
Ross
that.
then. So is that something that you'd be willing to wait on?
What do you mean, wait on?
Well, I mean, I don't think deferment is going to get us anywhere because I don't necessarily know what we're asking for deferment. And if it was me in the same position, I'd want to be really clear as far as what exactly we were coming back with. If it's just merely a statement, then I mean, I think he stated as clearly as he can that he's willing to do it without telling us he's willing to do it. But then I guess on the flip side, we are talking about this piece as far as the setback to be, from a building height standpoint to make it, a little more attractive from that standpoint. Is that something from a time situation you can do?
No. If it is not approved tonight, which would be fine, it's your own prerogative. But if it's not approved tonight, this project is going to be done.
All right, so we need to get off the dime here, which means I need to get off the dime, which I will. So I've really benefited from listening to this conversation. I don't know if you all understand how hard this kind of thing is, but it's pretty hard. So what I'm going to do is vote in favor of it. But I'm going to tell you something, Ross, too. I think the building should not be more than 4 stories in height. I think higher than that is inappropriate scale. It's going to have bad ripple effects through the neighborhood you care about. Possibly the kind of setback that John described on the rooftop or, on the 5th floor would work because it would make the building look smaller than a 5-story building. But I think 4 stories is probably the best height. I think you have to have senior housing in it. If you don't, I won't feel good about that. And I don't think you would either. And, I don't know, what do you call it, the diagonal cut at the front door. I think that's a good aesthetic idea. It's really would work well for the neighborhood and for the North Side Marketplace. And what else? Those are the key things I'm thinking about. But for me, they're really important. I think they probably should be really important to you. So if you do, in fact, come back to us, like you said you intend to do, it would please me enormously if you would take what I just said into account and have it affect the design of your building. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah, when did that happen? 6:30? Okay, where are we on this piece of paper here? Okay, so no more discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Thomas,
No.
Throgmorton,
Yes.
Botchway.
Yes.
Cole,
No.
Dickens.
Yes.
Mims,
Yes.
Taylor.
No.
Motion carries 4-3. I understand there's correspondence. Could I have a motion to accept correspondence?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mims, seconded by Botchway. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item 6, fireworks amendment. Ordinance amending Title 8 Police Regulations, Chapter 5 Miscellaneous Offenses, Section 12 Fireworks to allow for the sale of some fireworks, revise definitions of fireworks, and increase the penalty for use of fireworks within the city limits, all in compliance with newly amended state law. This is first consideration.
Good evening, John Greer with the Fire Department.
Hold on, John, let me
you
get a
wanna do?
motion on the floor.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Botchway, seconded by Dickens. Discussion. John Greer.
Sorry for my anxiousness. This amendment updates the Title 8, Chapter 5, Section 12 fireworks. In May 2017, Governor Branstad signed Senate File 489 allowing for the sale and use of consumer fireworks during defined time periods in the state of Iowa, basically in around the 4th of July and New Year's Eve. Under the new law, cities retain the right to prohibit the use of fireworks if the use is determined to be a public safety risk or a public nuisance. This ordinance amendment will allow for the sale and possession of consumer fireworks, which lines it up with the Senate File 489, upstates the definitions of various classes of fireworks, and those are novelties, consumer, and display. Additionally, the amendment updates the penalty for using fireworks where prohibited, moving it from an unscheduled misdemeanor to a simple misdemeanor and setting the fine at a minimum of $250. Finally, the amendment continues the ban of use of consumer fireworks within the city. The novelty fireworks would not be affected by this amendment. Staff recommends approval.
Okay, any questions for John?
Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. Would anybody else like to discuss this topic? Okay, seeing no one, council discussion. Well, I guess I want to say is the chief's memo, two chiefs and who was the one other person? I'm forgetting now.
Eric Goers was on.
Thank you, our fine attorney, Eric Goers. As the memo indicates, the data are quite striking. Almost half of all July fires responded to by fire departments nationwide were started by fireworks. And in 2015, 67% of approximately 12,000 fireworks-related injuries treated in hospital emergency rooms occurred from mid-June to mid-July. I wonder why. And 38% of those injuries were to youth under 15. And the memo also states that the state of Missouri experienced roughly 7 times as many emergency room visits for fireworks over a 7-year period than Iowa did over a comparable 6-year period. They permitted fireworks, we did not. That's pretty striking. So I'm certainly going to support this particular proposal. Anyone else? Okay, hearing no discussion, roll call, please.
Throgmorton?
Yes?
Botchway?
Yes.
Cole?
Yes.
Dickens?
Yes.
Mims?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Chief. Okay, item 7, amending the City Code Title I, Chapter 8. Ordinance amending Title I, Administration, Chapter 8, Administrative Services Service Departments, Section 1, Administrative Service Departments, Organized, to revert the title of the Transportation and Resource Management Department to the Transportation Services Department to reflect a realignment of supervision over resource management to the Public Works Director. This is first consideration.
Move first consideration.
Second.
Moved by Mims, seconded by Botchway. Discussion.
This is a little bit of back to the future here. So we, a few years ago, we had moved the landfill and waste collection operations of the city into the what was the Transportation Services Department, and Chris O'Brien has been leading that effort. And you've seen the great work that's come out recently in the last couple of years. That some extra attention that Chris was able to provide and leadership that he was able to provide led us to be able to do. So the multifamily recycling and the single stream recycling as a couple of examples. The curbside composting would be another one. With Chris's impending departure later this month, we took the opportunity to take a step back and see where the best fit is in the organization for those departments, and I feel that Public Works is best suited to lead that department going forward. And so Ron Kanucky's up here. He will be assuming the responsibility of overseeing the resource management component of the city services, and can talk to you a little bit about some of the first steps going forward.
Sure. So obviously one of the first steps in having a new division is having a new division head. And so we've gone through the process and we've selected Jennifer Jordan to be our resource management superintendent. She will start that role on Monday. And then we'll look at the organization of the division and determine how we backfill, or if we backfill her role. And then also John Thomas retired a week ago Friday. And so
How did John Thomas do that? There's some conflict of interest.
John Thomas, assistant superintendent, retired a week ago Friday. And so we'll also be looking at his role in the backfill of that position also. So with Jen on board, we'll be able to start making those management decisions.
Great hands.
Sounds terrific. Thanks, Ron. Okay, any discussion?
I mean, it's just a concern. You know, I'm obviously happy about Jen Jordan getting the position, but making sure we're thinking about the work. I mean, I know that we're moving a position around, but there's a considerable amount of stuff that Chris was talking about from a resource management standpoint, and making sure that it's not, all falling on Jen's shoulders without adequate staffing.
So the position that Jen is assuming was created in the last budget cycle. So it's a enhanced position, staffing for the resource management. But I'm very confident that Jen will have the support that she needs, both below her and above her, to keep the momentum going. And that's a big thing that we've been talking about with Ron and the Public Works staff as they are going to assume oversight of these operations. Is we've got some really great momentum in the waste collection and the landfill, going not only from the services that we're offering, but the way in which we're just operating at the landfill. I feel much more confident in the way that operation is being managed now than I ever have before. So we'll keep it going, and Jen will have all the support that she needs to lead, and she'll do a great job.
I think it's indicative of the creativity within our staff that Jeff talks about it coming back to the future. When Tom was here and initiated the original changes, it was because of some issues that we had, but also looking at the strength of the staff that we had. And sometimes you don't just plug people into an organization. Sometimes you modify the organization to fit the strengths of the staff that you have. And that's what was done at that time. And as staff changes, sometimes you adjust the organization then to fit with those changes in staff. And so I think it's a very creative way to do things that a lot of organizations don't do. They try and sometimes put the square pegs in the round holes. And so I think this makes a lot of sense, and I have all the confidence in the world that staff will keep all those initiatives going. So I'm still trying to figure out a way to get Chris to stay, but
Anyone else? Hearing no one, roll call, please.
Botchway?
Yes.
Cole?
Yes.
Dickens?
Yes.
Mims?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Throgmorton?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Item 8, City Clerk Residency. Ordinance amending Title I, Administration, Chapter 7, City Officers, City Attorney, City Clerk, City Manager, Section 2, Appointment and Removal, to replace the residency requirement for the position of City Clerk with a residency preferred requirement. This is first consideration.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Botchway, seconded by Dickens. Discussion.
I'll just comment as having chaired the search committee twice for the city clerk. And we've talked about it at the council level and in the search process, but just, I think, for the public, we went through the first search. We appointed a city clerk. We looked at the candidates that we had, both in terms of quality and quantity, et cetera. And we had a hire, and unfortunately for us, and I guess maybe on the positive side for Chris Guidry, he had another offer that maybe fit him a little bit better in the long term, and so he made his tenure at the city short. And we all wished him well when he left. But as we looked at what had happened through that first process, we started talking, both I did with Eleanor and Jeff, and then we did as a council, about that residency requirement. And the difference in terms of the city attorney and city manager's positions being much more policy-driven and policy-oriented in terms of advising us in those ways, generating ideas, doing that research, et cetera. And so just structurally, the kinds of things they do are very different than what the city clerk does. And so having looked at that applicant pool, and knowing we were going to have to go back out a second time, it really was our consideration that we look at that residency as maybe a preferred rather than a hard and fast requirement. And so given that, and then also having made that change, affected the way we did the second search, but just simply, we thought that it was worth looking at that as a preferred. And so that's why we're here today, making that change. Or hopefully making it.
I think it's a reasonable move to make. So, anybody else care to discuss this? If not, roll call, please.
Cole?
Yes.
Dickens?
Yes.
Mims?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Throgmorton?
Yes?
Botchway?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Item 9, moratorium. An ordinance amending Title 17 of the City Code, Building and Housing, to establish a 6-month moratorium on the issuance of new rental permits and building permits that result in an enlargement of a rental building. Enlargement of a rental dwelling in RS5, RS8, and RNS12 zones within the area generally bounded by Scott Boulevard on the east, I-80 on the north, the Iowa River and Mormon Trek Boulevard on the west, and Highways 1 and 6 on the south in Iowa City, Iowa. This is first consideration.
Move first consideration.
Second.
Moved by Menz, seconded by Botchway. Discussion. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to address this topic? Good evening, Nancy.
Hi. I'm Nancy Carlson. I live at 1002 East Jefferson, and I would really appreciate having this moratorium put in. For most people, their house is their biggest investment that they will make in their lifetime. And when you make an investment in your house, you have a financial responsibility, but you're also making a commitment to the neighborhood. As someone who has lived in a neighborhood where rental properties have come in, I know what can happen to a neighborhood when there are lots of rental properties with people who do not live there and with very transient types of tenants who are not interested in the neighborhood. They're interested in having a place to live for a short period of time, and they move on. The other thing that I'm very much concerned with is long-term tenants. Because usually long-term tenants are not large groups of people. They're, singles or small families or 2 or 3 people. By taking away the number of occupants that can live in a rental house, these people are also going to be impacted. I feel that it is a fair thing that the people who own property and live there and people who want a smaller apartment and a more stable living condition also feel that their future and their living existence can be saved. So for that reason, I ask that you set up this moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Would anybody else like to address this topic? Good evening, Mike.
Hi. Let me check in here first. My name is, excuse me, Mike Oliver. I'm the owner of Prestige Properties. And I had a little bit of concern with the council earlier. Susan made a reference that the landowners make a lot of money. I just want to remind the council, my company pays well over $500,000 in property taxes a year. That being said, I want to address some of the dynamics of this issue that we're being faced with. This issue came about by the governor signing an order making sure that cities do not regulate the number of occupants in houses. I presented to the council a letter from our attorneys in Bell and McCormick in Des Moines that's working with me on this issue. We became alarmed at the last apartment association meeting when Stan Loverman said that the city may find a way to limit the current occupancy in the housings that we own. From that discussion at the apartment association meeting, we are going to ensure that we and our investment in the community, and I also live on the north side and have owned and lived, my family lives there, that our investment in our rental properties are not going to be in a situation, again, to have either a zoning or adverse city regulations impact our ability to maintain our business. Now, we try to be a good citizen in the neighborhood. Believe me, I pick up the trash as more often than most people do. I found some of the measures enlightening that was presented by the city manager in his presentation here. I also found some of them very concerning, especially some of them that are punitive in nature. But as an owner of a property at Gilbert and Davenport Street, I see a lot of the effects of the students living in the mixed neighborhood. But I also see issues that need to be addressed from the police department, enforcing more drive-bys rather than being on a complaint basis. So there's some improvements in all areas of the function the city can have on this. My attorneys prepared some things that have to do with the ordinance of Iowa City, of what we think that should happen if the city wants to impose this. We very much feel that this should go to the Planning and Zoning Commission if the city wants to impose this type of ordinance for review. And we cited the case law and the dynamics in there for the review for the city attorney to look at. This is not a simple, easy issue because, you know, in Iowa City, you know, we have a double-edged sword. We employ, with our commercial tenants here in my company, we have over probably 100 employees in Iowa City that live in the area. They're not transient workers, they live here. And I find that the governor's actions is going to make an impact on the way the cities address this issue, because it's going to come down to, if we have a 4-bedroom house that's 4 bedrooms and they're compliant, there's absolutely no reason why we can't have 4 people living there. If the city says, well, you can only have 3, well, it's very hard to regulate. I think there needs to be, as we move forward, we look at the houses, we look at some of the things. The city imposed a lot of regulation on historic neighborhoods, conservation districts, and I was a very big opponent of the conservation district last time, because when we did the analysis of that neighborhood, we had over 50% of the buildings were rental. And by overlaying the conservation district at that time, it just, the money wasn't going to be put back in those buildings like it needed to be to maintain the neighborhoods. I would like to think that the city attorney will take a hard look at the letter that was written by my attorney from Bell and McCormick, Michael Hayes, who used to be the city manager in Des Moines, and also on legal counsel, and also had a position with Hubble Development. He's very experienced, knows what he's talking about, and quite frankly, I think if we go ahead and impose this moratorium like you want, it's going to cause a lot more issues for us to be discussing. I think it's going to go into litigation. Because right now, I think we should take a step back, take a look at what we're going to do, maybe have some more dialogue with the rental association, and figure out what's the best course of action. But put a moratorium on this, it's going to affect the way leases are written. It's going to affect issues from tenants saying that they have a partner here and they want to have, you know, they're maybe not blood relatives like it was required now. Where is that litigation going to fall? Are they going to sue me or are they going to sue the city? I mean, we got to work this stuff out, and it's got to be a joint exercise. Not the housing department coming up with a lot more regulations on the landlords. Believe me, if I have a tenant that doesn't have air conditioning, like it happened last weekend during the art show, they're on us. The parents are on us, the kids are on us. Some of the regulations that have annual inspections of a water heater is beyond me where that's coming from. And some of the older houses, to hardwire all the smoke alarms, boy, that's going to be just a dynamic cost. And it's going to be very hard. And so I think at this point, I think the city council, before they rush into this, maybe need to step back here and figure out, Planning and Zoning Commission would require some public hearings, would require the steps to be followed in the right way to be able to approach this in a more logical, democratic manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
I'll ask any questions you guys. I mean, we're not only in the business of rentals, we're also in the business of converting some of our rentals to single family, and we're in the process of doing that. Yeah, but it's tough to do that in this neighborhoods because of some of the programs the city involved, because the housing programs actually takes the price of the average home. And so, like example, I had a house that we're converting at 1313 Davenport. To get the appraisal from one of the local appraisals to appraise at the cost that we're trying to sell it at was very difficult. You know, it's those, because of some of the prices from the sales of the university housing program. So there's got to be a balance here between the free market and what's going on in this neighborhoods. If you guys want to change the neighborhoods, maybe you want to think about maybe giving some incentives to the people like our companies or some of the other companies that want to come in and reestablish some of the housing stock. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. All right, anybody else like to address this topic? Seeing no one, council discussion.
So I'm supportive of the moratorium. I think it gives the city time, you know, even in the face of threat of possible litigation. I feel like this is an opportunity to step back and really kind of discuss the options that we have before us. I think that, you know, we do have to weigh the community interest, and there is a lot of concern that maybe was represented by some tonight, but, you know, I received a lot of communication, and when this, you know, was discussed, that we need to do something or discuss something about it. And so I'm happy with, you know, the step that we're taking to take some time and kind of work through some of these processes and move forward.
Can I make a couple comments before you all move on?
Sure.
So as I said in the council action report, short-term moratorium to preserve the status quo are legal mechanisms if they're appropriately tailored to address the problem that's presented. The city has no intention of regulating occupancy based on familial status. We understand that we are preempted from doing that under state law. But the issue is it's been a primary tool in maintaining the stability of our neighborhoods, and as was presented during your work session tonight, we need some time to figure out how we're going to replace that tool or restructure things so that we can continue to maintain the stability of our neighborhoods. And there's a number of ways to do that, but there's a lot of thought and study that has to be given to that. The letter I got from Mr. May, from Mr. Oliveira's attorney, as I think you know, it came in late this afternoon. I have read it. It doesn't cite case law. It makes two arguments. One, that this is a zoning ordinance and should go through the process, and two, or the P&Z process, and number two, that because we're making an amendment to we're allegedly making an amendment to the International Residential Business Code, that we have to have a public hearing under another section of the code. I considered all those issues when I drafted this. I understand the arguments being made, but I think that they're defensible, and I don't think it makes sense, since litigation is being threatened, for me to give you any more detail in a public setting. But I have no qualms with you moving forward.
I'm going to say nothing other than I plan to support it.
This is Pauline. I'm also in favor of voting for this moratorium, but I also have to add that I'm losing power on my phone, so after the vote, I'm probably going to have to sign off.
Okie doke. Thank you, Pauline.
We talked about this in detail at the actual work session. I'm not going to provide a ton of detail. We've already talked about that. But I would say this is a temporary measure. It has to be narrowly tailored. It's a temporary breathing mechanism. And I often find that a lot of times we come into contact with developers or people that are affected by our ordinances at this last stage. I'm hoping that there will be a proactive conversation over these next 6 months during this temporary measure, that we will reach out to everyone affected by this, and we'll look for some very specifically tailored solutions. So what this does is, and I have every confidence in Eleanor's analysis, is that this will give us the breathing space that we need so that we can make a thoughtful, lawful solution to this significant change in our regulatory mechanism. So I'm going to be supportive of this as well.
All right, so I was waiting for my colleagues here to speak. So my sense is that the recent state legislation poses an existential threat to our older residential neighborhoods. We have to do something to ensure that they thrive and continue to thrive. In order to do that, we need to take time, as Rockne just said, to thoughtfully develop effective strategies. The staff's memo, which we received earlier, and the discussion we had earlier this evening, provide a compelling rationale for setting this moratorium. So I'm going to support it, of course, but I also agree with Rockne that we should reach out and encourage staff to reach out to all affected parties as we're going through this deliberative process to make sure that we do it in a good way that enables people like Mike Oliveira to play a powerful and important role in ensuring that our neighborhoods thrive. Anyone else? All right. Roll call, please.
Dickens?
Yes.
Mims?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Throgmorton?
Yes.
Botchway?
Yes.
Cole?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Good night, Pauline.
Good night.
Could I have a motion to accept correspondence?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mem, seconded by Dickens. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 10, council appointments. Motion applicants must reside in Iowa City and be 18 years of age unless specific qualifications are stated. For the Board of Library Trustees, I gather we have one applicant, is that correct, for a position on the board? I'm really puzzled by this, but that's what I understand. So
It was a
yeah.
recommendation from the county.
Yeah. So we just got a recommendation from the Library Board of Trustees to appoint someone, right? But last week, our last meeting, we appointed 2 people to the Library Board, right?
County representative, so they make the recommendation and then.
Okay. So do we need to vote on this? Okay, so.
So moved.
Second.
And the appointment
Third.
would be Robin Petzold. So this is just a voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Again, could I have a motion to accept correspondence?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Botchway, second by Dickens. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 11, announcement of vacancies. Applicants must reside in Iowa City and be 18 years of age unless specific qualifications are stated. We have a new position, one vacancy to fill an unexpired term upon appointment in the Housing and Community Development Commission. All right, and then another set of positions, applications, for that one, applications must be received by 5 p.m. Tuesday, July 11th, 2017. Could I have a motion to accept correspondence on that, please?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Botchway, second by Dickens. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We have several previously announced positions, one vacancy to fill a 4-year term on the Airport Commission, 2 vacancies to fill unexpired terms upon appointment to the Airport Zoning Board of Adjustment, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term upon appointment to the Airport Zoning Commission, 1 vacancy for a Jefferson Street representative to fill a 3-year term on the Historic Preservation Commission, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term upon appointment to the Senior Center Commission, and 2 vacancies to fill 3-year terms on the Telecommunications Commission. Applications must be received by 5 p.m. Tuesday, June 13th, 2017. Item 12, no, not that, we already did that. Item 13, City Council information. Well, where should we start? Susan, why don't you start, please?
Okay, just a quick update on meetings with the Access Center. Jeff and I and Pauline participated in a meeting with kind of the electeds and some of the staff, talking about building structure in terms of not specifically properties, but more the governance structure, both of the building and of the organization itself. Coming out of the steering committee, there seems to be an interest in having something structured like a 28E agreements between the county and municipalities in terms of ownership of the physical property, and potentially a new nonprofit that would actually run the operation. For those of you that haven't been intimately involved, this is, it's a detox, it's sobering, it's crisis stabilization, crisis observation, et cetera, potentially low barrier shelter. So a lot of components similar to what is in San Antonio. We got some different input, I would say, at that electeds meeting. I think there's some preference maybe from the county in terms of them maybe running the actual operation. There was some discussion of starting on a smaller scale. The Steering committee met on Monday of this week, yesterday, and very much adverse to starting on a smaller scale. They're interested in meeting with that group of electeds to really talk about the integration of all these different pieces of it. And kind of in a nutshell, what it comes down to, I think, from those folks is we don't expect, even though we have officers and hopefully other first responders trained in CIT, they do not necessarily have the training to actually determine what kind of support or services an individual needs. Being intoxicated, being on drugs, being in mental health crisis, sometimes can be very distinct issues and sometimes can overlap significantly. And so to be able to drop them at a kind of triage center where you have experts doing that kind of analysis and figuring out really where they need their help is the method that is certainly preferred and people on the steering committee feel very strongly about. So we'll have a lot more discussion about that. And eventually we'll have more things coming back here. But just kind of wanted to give everybody a little bit of an update as you might be out either talking to other elected officials or run into some of the providers that happen to be on these committees, that you had a little bit of more information about what it is we're talking about and kind of where we're at. So just to give you an update there. I think that's it. That's enough.
Okay, thanks. John?
On a lighter note, we had our annual Brown Street block party, which you mentioned, and every neighborhood should have a block party.
Well, we didn't get any invites.
Well, have your
It's for
own
the people
block
on the
party.
block.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a really great neighborhood spirit builder and great fun. So.
Brown Street, though, huh?
Yeah.
No, it's open to
I'm
everyone.
having my own block party tomorrow, and
Right.
nobody's coming.
Yeah.
Nobody's invited.
Not invited.
Is that it, John?
That's it.
Rodney?
I discovered something wonderful this morning. If you haven't been to the Hickory Hill First Avenue entrance, I was running with my dog this morning. I discovered the beautiful new bridge that's been installed. When was that installed, Jeff?
Just last month.
Maybe a month ago.
It is spectacular, and before it was not. It needed some work, but that was just such a wonderful discovery to be running with my dog, and we turned to the corner, and I was all ready to sort of go in and, sort of trip over that area, and it was just beautiful. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. Awesome work. The other thing I wanted to announce, Black Voices Project is doing a community barbecue June 29th from 4 to 8 p.m. at Weatherby Park. They're going to try to have locally sourced pork and chicken and all the fixins. It should be a wonderful event. I think we may have some other nonprofits that are going to be there as well.
What dates?
June 29th, 4 to 8 p.m.
Weatherby? Thank you.
On a Thursday
Thursday,
evening.
yeah.
It was hard to pick a perfect date, but they decided that would be the best time.
As I promised at our last council meeting, I'm encouraging people to register to vote. There is some new ID changes that the state has implemented, but you can find those out by calling Kingsley, because he used to work in the voter registration area.
Or called their office.
Yeah. But there's other ways, if you don't have an ID, that there's other ways that you can still vote, but it'll keep the process going. We do have the bond issue coming up in September and the regular election in November. Also, Trail, the senior group that's helping seniors stay in their homes longer, is got an office now located on the second floor of the senior center. It's with the senior center fundraiser. They share the office there. And they just started accepting their first members last month, and it's starting to take off, and it's just a great program.
So I feel somewhat like a celebrity because I missed I think the last meeting, and I got a whole bunch of comments about where it was at and everything else. And so I will be missing next meeting because I have a work conference, and I think I expressed that before. But I just want to let people know that that's the case. June 24th, there's a block party that everybody's invited to downtown. So check it out. I'm really excited about that. Simon's done some wonderful work, and as well as city staff around kind of pushing that along from a ordinance standpoint, but just excited in general what the downtown has to offer for, again, everybody to participate in across Iowa City and the community as well. Eastern Iowa Refugee Summit on the 16th and 17th at West High. details are online. Just Google Eastern Iowa Refugee Summit. It's just a summit to you really talk about and focus on kind of the refugee struggles in our area. And there are a lot of refugees in our community, and so it's informational but also action-based summit that I think people really appreciate. Father's Day is 18th. Woo! Crisis Center Hunger Banquet is this Thursday.
You're not getting a meal.
We haven't decided that. It's supposed to be one of those things that you don't know about, but it's in the council packet as well, and so if you get an opportunity to participate, Crisis Center is doing some wonderful things, and I just think it's important to kind of address, hunger in our community in a more systemic way. Juneteenth is June 24th from 12 to 6. It's on the same date as the block party, but make sure you check that out at Mercer Park. Going back to the Father's Day element, my son pooped in the potty just now. I got the text, so I'm really excited about that. That's been like a struggle. Like, honestly, it's been a struggle for him and for us.
That's recorded for all time now.
Well, this is the point. This is the one time to do it for him, to make sure he gets upset about it later on. And then I did want to move forward on a separate piece, move forward on that safety piece. So I know that, Jeff, you talked about introducing that safety piece from a student liaison standpoint later on with the code changes, but I worry about the timing of it. And so, I mean, one of the things that was brought up in that memo in the late packets was, not necessarily brought up, but the fact that there were changes in regards to safety, locks and other things that were problematic for a lot of our, student-used or heavily student-used buildings. I did think, even though we're looking at this moratorium for some other of the housing code changes, I did think it was appropriate to move forward on these particular changes separate from that, just because
especially the exterior locks.
Especially the exterior locks, just because that could have a great deal of relevance for people moving in with the fall. Just didn't know how council felt about that, and kind of want to throw that out as far as and Jeff obviously.
Well, we don't have anything drafted. By the time we were to get something through, it may be a little unrealistic to try to get landlords to retrofit all their rental properties by the fall lease date. I think that's asking quite a bit. Given the number of rental units we have, if you're looking at rekeying all the buildings potentially. I don't know the extent of how many buildings would need to be rekeyed, under what type of circumstance you'd be agreeable to, but I don't think it's as easy as just getting you some code language and expecting the locks to be all fixed by August 1.
Okay. I mean, it's just it is a serious issue that we have to figure out something. And even if we're not able to do it right away, if we can talk about what kind of increased police presence would be around some of those buildings that may be concerns, I think that may be another way to address it. But if we're gonna kind of push that back with some of the housing changes, then I'd be agreeable to that if we could think about kind of that increased police presence along those lines.
We'll have that conversation.
Okay, doke. Well, I want to mention a few items. I have a long list, but I'll mention just a few. First, I had the opportunity to go to the visitation for Coralville Mayor Jim Fawcett on May 29, and it's sad to see a longtime elected representative or anyone really die, of course, but it was important to be there, I think. So I'd just like to express my condolences to Carol and their family for Jim's passing. Speaking of mayors, I'm going to be having lunch with the mayors of Coralville and North Liberty on the 9th of June. I'll be speaking at the Merge grand opening on the 15th of June. I'll be speaking at the IC Compassion's Refugee Summit on the 16th of June. Also, Pride Parade will take place on the 17th, a notable event in Iowa City. And speaking of parades, I had to defer my first mayor's walk of the season due to the weather. So I'm going to do it on tomorrow, Wednesday, June 7th. Also, this is my last thing. Yesterday's late handout contains a letter I wrote to David Weiseneck at the Motley Cow, and I would like to take this opportunity to read it. It's a short letter, but I would like to have it publicly stated. So this is dated June 5th to David Weiseneck. Dear David, like many other Iowa Cityans, I was saddened to hear that you will soon be closing Motley Cow and beginning a new phase of your life. Rather than dwell on the sadness, I want to congratulate and thank you for bringing, quote, the cow into our lives. As you know much better than I, running a successful restaurant for so long is no easy feat. For almost 2 decades, the Cow has provided the setting for countless memorable moments, not just for me and my family, but for your North Side neighbors and the entire Iowa City community. With considerable personal grace, you have deftly managed to build a business that excels in providing skillfully cooked and locally sourced foods, while also creating an unmatched atmosphere for community gathering. A strong sense of community is rooted in how people interact and build relationships with one another, and the Motley Cow has played a vital role in strengthening the sense of community within the North Side neighborhood. I know I am not alone in saying how much Iowa City will miss the Motley Cow and its many wonderful employees. For all this, I sincerely thank you. Best wishes for the future, Jim. Okay. Jeff, your turn.
Real quick, I want to introduce Jamie Porter, sitting right here next to Simon. Jamie joined our office this week as our intern. He's a student at the university. I met Jamie when he was a freshman here at a kind of a local government career path seminar on campus, and have kept in touch over the years. He'll be a great addition to our office over the summer, and look forward to working with him.
Welcome.
He's a Regina grad, too.
Yes.
I thought you might like that, Terry. Ashley?
I just echo Jeff's statements about welcoming Jamie, so thanks.
Eleanor? Kelly, our soon-to-be city clerk. We're really happy that you're going to be joining us that way, Kelly, and thanks for your work tonight. Okay, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Moved by 2 people. Seconded by those same 2 people.
Take your pick, Kelly.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Watch Wayne Manley.
Motion carries.
You're watching City Channel 4. On TV, online, on demand, on Facebook, and now on the go on your mobile device.